Hi, I'm Jennifer Ackerman Haywood from the Craft Sanity podcast, which has always been an audio show. So I'm trying something different today. In honor of Juneteenth, I'm going to interview the artist Dano Wall, who came up with the really clever stamp that allows you to turn your Jackson 20 into a Tubman 20 with this stamper. And it lines up really cool. Okay, so before we go any further, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about Harriet Tubman. She was an incredible woman who was basically one of the most famous abolitionists out there. And she was actually born into slavery in Maryland. And then in 1849, she escaped, and then she kept going back to help free family members and other slaves from the plantation system. And she used, there's a whole system of safe houses and a whole network of people that helped make this trip north possible for the people seeking freedom. So that was before this American Civil War. And then once the war started, Tubman worked as a spy for the Union Army during the war. So this woman did not shy away from dangerous situations by any means. And then after the war ended, Tubman continued to work with former slaves to try to help them. And she also worked with the elderly. And for that reason, for all these contributions, that's why in 2016, the U.S. Treasury Department announced that she was going to replace Andrew Jackson on the front of the $20 bill. But that plan was halted by the Trump administration. And that's where Dano Wall and his Tubman stamp comes in. So anyway, in honor of Juneteenth, we're going to highlight a project you can do in your own home to help get people thinking a little differently about who our American heroes are. The statues are made of these folks. We got all these white guys on our money, and I think in light of everything that's going on in the world, it's time to rethink some of these things. So I think you'll enjoy this conversation. I hope it's thought-provoking and interesting. And we get into just the whole, how does one make a stamp and mass produce it? So for those of you who might have an idea of something you want to do, this will have some practical applications as well. Dano is a 34-year-old guy who works he works for a company that does educational electronics, and he heads up the manufacturing operation. So he has a lot of experience with 3D printing and, just fabricating, like taking these ideas and making them into something that actually can work. So he's a real smart guy. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. I'm not going to go into a whole explanation of what I've been up to these last few months, actually several months, longer than that, almost a whole year. And I will fill you guys in on the second episode that I do in this series. So this is technically episode 224 of the Craft Sanity podcast. And now it's going to be, like I said, we're going to try this video format. Let me know what you think. But let's get into that interview. And just leave a comment below or send me a note, jennifer@craftsanity.com, if you want to give me some feedback at the end. I'd appreciate that. All right, so grab a project, settle in. You guys know what to do. And sit back for, what do I usually say? Let's get to it. It's time to craft sanity. See, I almost forgot. It's been so long. It's good to be back, guys. Dano, welcome to Craft Sanity. The podcast is coming back now as a video component as well. So thank you for walking through this experimental first episode in the video format. I appreciate that. Sure. I'm so glad I'm a supporter of what you're doing. I got my Tubman stamp. I had it upside down. I will correct that. And I was so excited to get it. And I had to wait a little bit because I know you were sold out at the time. I heard about, I think I read an article. You've gotten a little press in some prominent places. And so I'd read an article and I'm like, oh, I need to get a stamp. So if you can maybe talk a little bit about what is the Tubman stamp and what does it do?
Sure. So I started prototyping these in early 2017. And that was shortly after the Trump administration took office. And there hadn't been big news about the cancellation of the plan to put Harriet Tubman on the 20 yet. But in some interview early in 2017, when Steve Mnuchin was asked about it, he had indicated it wasn't a high priority for them anymore. And so that already was sort of worrying. And so I sort of took it upon myself to look at different images of Harriet Tubman and start playing around with how you could actually get her on there yourself if the government wasn't going to follow through and do what I thought was the right thing. So having access to a laser cutter at work, I started playing around with some rubber. These are some early prototypes that I did.
Okay.
And you can sort of see the striations as the laser goes across. It sort of leaves these streaks because it's just doing it line by line. So I had some different types of rubber. I also experimented with trying to 3D print it because I have access to 3D printers as well. I've got some behind me here. But it's hard to get the definition and the ability to sort of pick up and transfer ink with 3D printed plastic. So I made a handful of prototypes, figured out how to get it to align right, and started stamping some bills. And instantly, I was sort of taken aback by how powerful it was to see Harriet Tubman on the bill, perfectly replacing Andrew Jackson, totally covering him up.
You have some bills with you?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, if you want to show that.
Stamped ones here. You can see it's just like top of his hair is still visible because he had big hair, but the features are replaced. I've got some different types of ink. This one is just a slightly different ink, a dark green. Yeah, as soon as other people saw it, they sort of had the same reaction. And I think knowing about the government's plan to put her on the bill was important and symbolic, but it's a different thing to see it represented visually. This isn't the design that they were going to put forward, but it happened that this image of Harriet Tubman, which is now the earliest known photograph of her, happened to line up pretty well with Andrew Jackson's features as he's represented on the bill. So that's what I went with. And yeah, the visual impact was really immediately obvious. And so I started making more, giving them away to people just as, gifts for friends, for birthdays and stuff. And, it's just built by its own momentum sort of naturally until about this time last year when Ayanna Pressley, in questioning Steve Mnuchin further about their plans to put Harriet Tubman on the 20, he really confirmed that it was officially delayed. He said until 2028. There's different reports of how long that delay is going to be, but then it sort of really took off in a big way, and CNN and the Washington Post picked up the story, and so that's the point at which I really had to start manufacturing a lot more of these, and realize that this wasn't necessarily an art project anymore, but could be a legitimate stamping campaign and potentially put some real pressure on people who have the power to make these decisions. And so I tried to just do what I do best, which is in the realm of manufacturing and design, and just figure out how to pump out as many stamps as I could as quickly as I could.
And so I'd like to back up for a second. When did you stamp your first 20?
I think it was in March of 2017.
Okay. Were you at home when you did that, or were you at work? I mean, was anyone around? Were people around to show this to?
Yeah, I think it was at work, and I showed some coworkers, and everyone was just like, "Oh, this is important. This is good," and it's just sort of caught on from there.
And the cutout on here is really cool, the alignment, because you can just align it with the seal that's on there.
Yeah,
so that makes it very easy to do.
I don't have my original design, but yeah, I eventually landed on this simplified version with the cutout. I tried aligning it a couple different ways on the bill, and that seemed to be the easiest, most reliable alignment method. But I realized as I was making these stamps right away that if you just stamp the bill, randomly, the effect is totally lost because you can't really tell what face is there. You just sort of blot over. But if you're able to align it with some precision, you can do the replacement effect, and that's what really made it different from other stamps that I'd seen.
Now, did you do some kind of computer overlay to try to see what it was going to look like, or did you work all from your prototypes that you 3D printed? Or
there was a fair amount of trial and error, but yeah, I managed to get some image data of $20 bills into an image editing program and try and figure out how I needed to crop and rotate and size things so that the features would line up and be at the right scale.
I know the big question everybody asks me when I say I'm stamping 20s, they say, are you just wasting all your money? Like you can't use it? And what's going on? Is it even legal? Now, did that come up for you? Were people afraid that you were encouraging people to stamp their money, deface a 20 and then no, it's no longer useful? Because it is in fact illegal. But what is the description or the information you give people when they ask about that?
Right. Yeah, I actually have some legal research that I often share with people when they ask about it and want more detailed information. But in short, statute 333 of the U.S. Code of Regulations is what covers defacement or mutilation of currency. And there's this sort of persistent misconception in the U.S. that marking currency in any way is illegal. But the statute is very specific about what things you can and can't do. And a lot of it is sort of common sense. You can't burn money. You don't want to destroy it because that's removing it from circulation. You don't want to put advertisements on it because you can't use federal property to advertise your own stuff. So no website names or no product names. And you can't cover up the text or the denomination. You can't, change the 2 into an 8 and try and make it an $80 bill. All that stuff is just sort of common sense. Don't do that. Government doesn't like it when you do that, and you can get in trouble. But the punishment for these things is actually pretty slight compared with making counterfeit currency. Counterfeiting is what people often sort of confuse mutilation of currency with, and counterfeiting can get you 10 years in jail and is a felony. And if you are, crossing out numbers on a bill and trying to write in your own denominations, you can get fined or jail sentence of a few months. But there's a pretty big disparity between these two different forms of breaking the law. In this case, stamping over Andrew Jackson, there aren't any security features on his face. There's the watermark on the bill. There's some UV dots. Some other things, but there's nothing that the stamp actually covers over. And so as long as you're stamping and not creating such a large contrast difference between the ink and the bill itself that you trigger a contrast alarm, which some digital scanners have, they still go through just fine. I've used them in plenty of vending machines and deposited them in bank ATMs and haven't had an issue using them. And if people do run into that, I suggest just using a slightly lighter ink like this green one, which still gets the same effect, but I haven't found a single machine that rejects these. Whereas sometimes if you're using a black ink like this, if the scanner is looking for an extra contrast threshold, it'll spit it back out. So something's wrong with this.
So what is your favorite color ink? Or a favorite brand? Do you have a brand that works really well?
I do, yeah. Ranger Archival ink is actually one that I use a lot. I've tried 20 different ink pads. This is Library Green, but it's acid-free and permanent waterproof ink, and it works really nicely. So that's one that I use a lot. But I've tried a lot of different kinds. Blue ink also seems to not have any sort of issues in digital scanners. So there's quite a bit of leeway.
Okay. And has anyone come after you? Has anyone tried to scare you to stop doing this from the government? Has anyone said, hey, we don't want her on the 20 and we don't want you putting her there? And now you have a bunch of people. I don't know how many people you think are out there stamping 20s how many of these have you sold so far?
I think I just recently passed 5,000 orders on Etsy.
Oh, congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. A lot of those orders are for multiple stamps though, so I'm not exactly sure how many individual stamps are out there. And prior to making this available on Etsy, I was making and selling tons of them just outside of that, either giving them away or people would just send me money on Venmo for them. Wow. So I think realistically it's probably close to 7,000 stamps that are out in the wild. And it's hard to extrapolate from that how much actual currency has been stamped, but it's a significant amount. I would ultimately like to hit, some single digit percentages of, all circulating 20s being stamped, because I think at that point it would be really difficult to ignore. But I realize that is a really tough hill to climb. So
How many
doing my best to
20s?
make.
How many 20s are in circulation, roughly? Do you have any idea?
Um, I actually forget the exact number, but I have looked this up. And you'd need to, be stamping on the order of millions of bills to hit, 3 to 5% of the
Okay, so it's
circulating
going to take a bit.
currency. It's a lot.
Okay. And to backtrack, I asked you like 5 questions at once. My apologies. To
Sure.
backtrack to the question, is that anyone reached out to you or has the government expressed any dissatisfaction to you personally? Have you had any issues at all with anyone?
The government, no. The government does not seem to be either interested or capable of addressing something like this. But I have received a significant amount of angry messages or hate mail from people who, think I'm breaking the law or don't want Harriet Tubman on the 20, who really admire Jackson. So I occasionally still get emails or messages from those sort of people. And I think, and I see my role in this as, trying to advocate as best I can for why I think this is important and why, the arguments against it, I think, all fall flat when you really examine them. And so when I receive these messages, I try to assess if the person is being a troll or not, because you don't want to feed the trolls, as the internet saying goes.
Right.
But if someone does seem to be legitimately upset, I'll try to respond to every angry message I get, and at least open the opportunity to have a conversation about it. Explain, in short, why I think this is important, why I'm doing this, and ask them if they want to talk about it. So far, I haven't had any dickers. No one
wants
really,
to talk about it.
I mean, people who send hate mail don't really, I think, usually expect to get like a
kind response. Yeah.
Sort of compassionate response as to, right. I hear why you're angry, but I mean, we should think about this a little harder.
Now, what do you tell them? Because when you have a Jackson supporter, and maybe if you want to give just a very short, for people who might not, recall from history class, and so a lot of this stuff is kind of glossed over the way that's, I know in my experience, I didn't really learn about American history like full on until college. And then I was very sad about what I learned. But what do you think is important for people to know about Jackson?
Well, yeah, there's sort of a lot of superficial arguments that people come at me with about Jackson, that he was the founder of the Democratic Party, that he founded the Federal Reserve Bank, that he was this, really important U.S. historical figure. And these things are true, but also you have to put them in the context of, centuries of time between when he was alive and where we are now. And so saying he was the founder of the Democratic Party is not the same thing as saying that he represents current democratic ideals. And so that's pretty easy thing to sort of point out. Be like, well, these are things change over time, obviously. But he also was, in his own time, sort of Trumpian figure. He had a book ghost written about him, as though it was an autobiography similar to Trump's Art of the Deal, that sort of lionized him. And so a lot of people who are strong defenders of Jackson and really like him are basing a lot of their information on him from this sort of post hoc rosy class vision of who he was, when in reality he was pretty brutal man. He was, explicitly racist, and is, I think, most well known now for the Trail of Tears, the Indian Removal Act, and a lot of really, tragic genocidal things that he accomplished in his lifetime. And so I think, he doesn't represent the ideals that we say our country represents in any way. And so I think it makes sense in his time to sort of move past that antiquated view of America. And Harriet Tubman, I think, almost more than any other figure in American history, really does represent all these ideals that we tell ourselves we uphold. And so she's the sort of perfect antidote to this really toxic character that we have representing on our currency. So I think that's on its own a very strong argument for putting her on the bill. But another thing I'll tell people is that there's this idea of like that social change is somehow a zero-sum game. Like if we put a Black woman on the bill, that's somehow taking something away from another group of people. And in fact, I think it's rare that things are that simple and cut and dry. We're not living in this zero-sum society. And I think, having Black women represented on our currency is a net benefit for everybody. And I think looking, with any depth into the subject makes it really clear that you want to have people feel included in the national conversation. You want to tell people that they're important, worth listening to as citizens, and that strengthens our societal bonds together and benefits everybody. And so, what I tell people who are against this is, if you aren't in it for the moral case, which is already pretty bulletproof, you don't have to be in this for the altruistic case. This also benefits you. You're fighting against your own self-interest by pushing back against this.
And then people do not decline, or they decline to have a further discussion, it sounds like, when you send that. Yeah. Well, maybe that just gives them something to think about. The original plan, to my knowledge, were they going to move Jackson to the back of the bill? Was that the plan? Is that put Harriet Tubman on the front and move?
That was the plan near the end of 2016. And who knows if that would have changed at any point in the redesign process. But it's my understanding that this was fast-tracked, in April 2016 is when it was announced. And changing out American currency is a long and complicated process. But it sounds like they were trying to move on this fast enough to get it out in under a year, because 2020 was the year that it was supposed to start entering circulation. It's the 100th year anniversary of women getting the right to vote, the 200th year anniversary of Harriet Tubman's birth, we think. And it's not exactly clear when she was born, but it lined up in all these really significant symbolic ways. And the plates, as I understand it, had already been designed and cut. And so all that would be needed would be to start the process of making the new bills. So it was not a very heavy lift for the next administration coming in to pull off. And that was how it was designed by the Obama administration. Like, let's get as much of this done as quickly as we can so that this is just ready to go when the time comes.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping that Jackson would just be retired completely, not put on the back, because it's one of those things that, and I think you seem to be the type of person too, is once you know something, you can't unknow that information. So to have a man, the engineer of the Trail of Tears, on every 20 that I'm handing out, like, that is upsetting to me, just because the people that we put on those pedestals, it's just amazing to me how hard people fight to maintain that even after they have the information that is basically saying this doesn't really represent us now. It is definitely part of history, but not maybe the history we want to celebrate. Every time it's somebody's birthday and we're like, happy birthday, Joe, here's a 20 with the face of a man who caused a lot of pain and destruction. So so this becomes more than just a stamp on a $20 bill. I mean, there's a lot of more going on with what you're doing. Do you feel in the current climate, because obviously a lot has changed since you started making these stamps, are you seeing an uptick in the amount of people that are getting involved and wanting to stamp 20s and help you with this? I mean, how is everything? I mean, obviously the Black Lives Matter movement is really going strong right now. And there's a lot of people very upset about the racial unrest happening in our country. Have you had any conversations with people about what's going on now? And maybe, I don't know if you're connecting with people in a different way than you were when you first started this process.
Honestly, it's been fairly steady since about this time last year. There was a lot of interest initially, and after the sort of viral moment it had in May of 2019, there was its peak spike in demand, which I was totally unprepared to fill. But after that, it sort of maintained a really steady pace, aside from dip during the peak coronavirus pandemic, when people were staying in and obviously not wanting to use cash as much.
Right.
But since then, I'm basically coming home and I have a day job, and then at night I'll make stamps, package them up, get them ready to ship out, and it's just a very steady daily churn of getting orders out.
And is this something are these expensive to make? Because are you 3D printing the handle for all these, like the whole thing is, or
not
no?
Anymore.
Okay,
No.
because I was going to say that would take so long and be quite expensive to do.
Yeah, so initially I was 3D printing the handles. This is a test one that I did out of this sort of marble-like filament with a laser engraved face. But laser engraving is great for prototyping things, but it takes 10 minutes or so to engrave each face. It's a slow process, or slow if you're trying to scale up. It's fast if you're prototyping something and want to just do a couple iterations. So I moved on from 3D printing to having handles injection molded, which you can do much faster. Just pump these out by the thousands. And then also molding the stamp rubber itself. So there's a shop in the East Village in New York called Casey Rubber Stamps, run by this old Irish guy, John Casey, that makes real gum rubber stamps in this old-fashioned process and a heat press. He's got like a car jack, and he cranks this thing up and vulcanizes rubber in the press. And so you start out with these gummy sheets of rubber, and then he'll make them in sheets like this. And so it's this, tough, floppy sheet of rubber that has 12 stamps on it. So I go and pick those up, I bring them home, and then I'll trim them down to squares like this, just trim off the excess, and that gives you an edge to align against. Then I'll send these sheets off to a laser cutter, and they'll laser cut out the outlines of each stamp, and so then I can turn the sheets into piles of stamps like this.
Okay.
And so you can see just cut out with the right outline. But since it's many different manufacturing processes coming together, it took some time to make sure that I could cut precisely enough against the lines that were added to the design of the stamp sheet, and design a laser file that would cut accurately enough to make sure that everything lined up correctly. You can see a small detail that I added to these sheets, these little nubs at the vertices of the stamp. And so I could tell that, when I got it back, the laser passes through the center of each of those little bumps. And so I can see, verify that the alignment is correct, and make adjustments if necessary based on that.
So this is a very complex manufacture. There's several steps to it. It's not just you with the scissors cutting these out after work.
Right. Yeah. It took me a while to figure out how to do this in such a way that I could, still maintain the quality I wanted of the stamps, keeping the alignment exact, while also being able to scale it up.
So are you gluing the pieces together, the stamp to the handle?
Yeah. So once I have the stamp rubber, get the handles, and I just use some cyanoacrylate glue, super glue.
Okay.
Glue those together. Once I have it all glued together, some of the glue squishes out the edges between the rubber and the plastic handle. So I'll use a belt sander and sand off any excess and sort of polish it up, and use some stamp cleaning fluid to get rid of any dust or any sort of marring from the laser cutting process.
So this sounds like this is not going to be, you have a lot of time and energy invested. So this isn't really a get rich quick kind of plan for you. Like that's not what this is about. Do you make anything off of these? Because it seems like there's quite a bit of labor and materials that goes into each one, and your price point is $20, correct? I think that's what I paid. Yeah. So
Yeah, this is from the start. I saw this as a not-for-profit endeavor.
mhm,
As you know, I'm a cis, straight, white male, healthy, educated, born in the 1980s in the United States. So, real talk, I'm going to be fine.
mhm,
Have another job, and so I've used this project as a way to raise money for different charities. And so I do have to um, pay taxes, which from 2019 was more than I expected. But the government does want its cut of everything, so I had to set
mhm.
aside enough money to cover taxes, set aside enough money to cover expenses for all the different parts, ink pads, rubber, and handles, and glue, and packaging materials. But then after that, I set aside whatever's profit and donate that to different charities.
That's awesome. So how much
The
have you been
way
able to donate so far?
I have about 40,000 that I've raised for charity so
Excellent.
far.
And who have you
Um,
donated it to? What organizations are you supporting?
it's it's actually a long list, and I've learned a lot about philanthropy in this process. You can see the list of organizations I support on tubmanstamp.com.
Okay.
Um,
I can just
and
link to that for people who want to know. Yeah.
yeah, tubmanstamp.com/hashtag charities will take you right to that section.
Okay.
Um, but the project initially was sort of kickstarted in 2018 with a grant from the Awesome Foundation, which is sort of a nationwide group of people that will give grants of $1,000 to people to sort of get projects going. So I applied for this in, I guess, August of 2018, when I was at a point where I'd made a lot of stamps and sort of tallied up what I'd spent and realized I'd, sort of put in $1,000 of my own money into getting the rubber and materials, the 3D printing filament and stuff,
Mhm.
to make all these stamps, and realized that it was becoming unsustainable because more and more people wanted the stamps. So I needed some way to figure out how to make it sustainable. And so I went with the grant process, ended up getting the $1,000 grant. And along with that came a bunch of press about winning this grant. And so that's sort of where I realized I could make these available for sale on Etsy, which would handle a lot of the shipping logistics for me. So I wouldn't have to be manually writing addresses on labels for people. And figured out that there's a sort of poetic justice in pricing them at $20, given that they're meant to stamp $20 bills.
Mhm.
And in doing that, I could make it a self-sustaining project. And so as I began selling these, I wanted to sort of return the favor that the Awesome Foundation had given me by giving me this $1,000 grant and start giving out $1,000 donations to other charities that I thought were meaningful and sort of in line with the ideals that Harriet Tubman represents, and sort of the antithesis of Andrew Jackson. So I started with Sister Song, which is an Indigenous-led organization that fights for reproductive justice, and sort of larger organizations like Planned Parenthood and the ACLU and the Southern Poverty Law Center. And at a certain point, I realized that I was just sort of adding up a bunch of groups that I was giving away $1,000 to, and that I could probably be more strategic in how I made these donations. And so I put together larger bundles and made a bigger donation of $5,000 to the Lakota People's Law Fund, which is trying to prevent pipelines from cutting through Lakota land in Canada. And so I'm sort of, my process is evolving as this project has grown, and the amount of money that I'm able to bring in has grown along with it.
What advice do you have for other makers out there who want to contribute to charity this way? Because I'm assuming that it can be kind of complex when you have when tax time rolls around,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to show not just one donation, but like a lot of donations to a lot of different places. Then you also have your Etsy fees and other things that come into
Mm-hmm.
it. So what have you learned, and what advice do you have for someone that might want to do some good, but also want to make sure they do good bookkeeping?
Right.
So they don't get in trouble.
Yeah, bookkeeping is very important. In my case, I hired an accountant to help me with my taxes this year because I didn't really have the time to go through everything on my own. I did okay bookkeeping on my own was using spreadsheets.
Mhm.
But I think it's worth it to pay a couple extra $100 to have someone go through it with you and be like, okay, yes, you've done your taxes correctly. You do actually owe this much money, and here's why. And sort of help you through that process, at least the first year. I found that really essential. So yeah, if you are suddenly overwhelmed by the process of bookkeeping and paying taxes, an accountant, I think is well worth it. And on the philanthropy side, it's not as simple as just sort of, clicking send money to people. It involves a decent amount of research. And so I think it's important to go into it with that mentality that it's going to take a non-trivial amount of work to figure out who and how to get money to people in a way that's effective. Because it's not just about, giving it away so you can say you've given it away. It's about
Right.
trying to be strategic in how you do it so that you actually are able to have some positive effect. And so I think there's a decent amount of sort of due diligence that's incumbent upon the person who's donating, involved in finding the right groups, finding people within those groups to talk to, talking to other people who are involved in the world of philanthropy, and just getting good advice on where money is needed at that time, and where you can be most effective with whatever sums you're able to move around.
Now, I know with a lot of charities, there's administrative costs and things like that. So sometimes people get upset when they realize they make a donation and there might be some of that money sometimes is used with an administrative, kind of to keep things running, where
Mm-hmm.
some folks want to just see their money get to a place where it's going to be used in a way that they're really happy about. What things do you look for when you're deciding which groups to donate to and how to go about that? I mean, are you trying to make things in a very hyper local level, like where it's not the parent organization, it might be the specific place doing this specific thing? I mean, how specific are you with your directing those donations?
I try to look them up on a couple different websites to see, what percentage goes to administrative costs. The one I can think of off the top of my head is Impact Matters, and that will list, any 501c3 organization and give some information on it. So I try to do research there, and otherwise, I'm just talking to other people who are either involved directly or tangentially with whatever cause I'm interested in.
And do you follow up to kind of see what happens after the fact? I mean, not in a like an aggressive way, but do you ever like check in to see what happened with the funds?
Yeah. It often results in sort of an open channel dialogue being formed between you and the organization, because they aren't typically receiving large donations from just individuals.
Mm-hmm.
So in my case, Canva is a New York-based nonprofit that helps homeless people and also high school students sort of with college prep. And so I've donated to them a couple times, and am in contact now somewhat regularly with the woman who processes donations there. And am interested to see sort of what stuff they're doing as time goes on, as different things come up in the city, how they're helping. And I've gone from sort of giving them larger one-time donations to becoming just a sustaining donor, which is more feasible for a lot of other people, and I think helps organizations know that they'll have a certain amount of money at a certain amount of
Right.
time. It's difficult for organizations to sort of just like get a bunch of money all at once and then do the accounting around it, paying people, because you need to know that you'll have money going forward continually. So I've moved from doing only large single donations to trying to spread it out, and becoming just a sustaining donor for a lot of organizations. So Canva is one that I like. It's more local to New York, but the Human Utility is another one that just helps people pay water and electricity bills. I think that's focused in Detroit. Give Directly also a lot of people have heard of, which just gives money directly to people who need it. And there's a lot of other smaller organizations sort of popping up that are in this vein of being like, give us some money, we'll make sure it goes to the right people and has the most impact, rather than being spread around to cover organizational costs.
Now, were you doing a lot of philanthropy before you started selling these stamps? I mean, was this something that you had, it's just part of your life, or is this kind of a new chapter that you're going full blast at now?
It's definitely on a new level now. But yeah, I was a sustaining member of a lot of different organizations prior to this. But I now suddenly have access to regular funds through the stamp sales that I didn't really have before. So trying to be responsible on how I deal with that and manage that.
So what would you say the first step is for someone who's out there? You've given a lot of advice about how to find a place and how to, make your donation, but there's also that accountability to the people you're selling the product to. So it sounds like you have this listed on your website. So you list it there. What other advice do you have? Because sometimes people say, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to donate $5 from every whatever they're selling to charity. And then sometimes you don't know if the person really is doing that or not. So
Right.
What advice do you have just as a maker, like to other makers, like what you can do to kind of like make sure your market, the people supporting you know that it's actually going where you said it's going to go, and how do you view that accountability to the people buying stamps?
Yeah, it's sort of a tricky line to walk, because on the one hand, I'm aware that I don't want to be overly performative and being like, look at all the good deeds I have done. And so I will, make mention of this occasionally on social media or on Twitter, and trying to point people in the direction of groups I support to try and amplify what they're doing, or draw in more donations than what I can actually give. But otherwise, I will just respond to people individually if they have more specific questions, and share information with people about, exactly what I've donated and what quantities and what dates, and keep sort of the documentation of all that on my computer. And I'm happy to share that with people if they ask, but try not to make that the focal point of what I'm doing, because I don't want to turn people off from supporting organizations by making them feel like they can't, follow up in commensurate way, or feel like I'm sort of dunking on them.
Yeah, I think that's especially now with everything that's going on, and people are taking to social media and, really publicly declaring their support for things. That's been criticized, sometimes if someone's making themselves the center of the issue as opposed to keeping the focus on the issue or cause they're trying to support. So it is a delicate thing. So I think I like the fact that you're keeping detailed information. If someone has a question, they can reach out to you. So it sounds like that's great advice for makers out there. Just keep your information straight. So you kind of answer those questions, but you might want to maybe err on the side of dialing back when it comes to pronouncing all these wonderful things that you're doing to the world. So yeah, well, I'll shift to something, since you don't like to talk about it, you and all these great things you're doing. But I will say, I thank you on behalf of, everybody out there that loves the stamp, for doing what you're doing, because it is very, very satisfying, more satisfying than I imagined to stamp a 20. I really it's a real power trip of just feeling like you're kind of taking back some ugliness in American history and kind of trying to make something right, even though it won't make it right. But giving Harriet Tubman her due, she's definitely earned the right to be on the 20. So the other questions I had is just, overall the response, would you say that it's way more positive than negative? Because there are some angry folks out there who have responded, but do you hear also from people who are just really happy that you're doing this?
Yeah, it's definitely more positive than negative, the response I've gotten. There's a fair amount of, I think, well-placed skepticism, given that I'm, a straight white guy who's, advocating for something that could be seen as trying to dismantle a system that historically has benefited me and people like me. But I think that skepticism is correct, and I don't take that personally. I think that's sort of in line with trying to work and live in an anti-racist way. Is that's sort of just is something that you accept and comes with the territory. And so it's sort of split between those two veins, with a dash of hate mail thrown in occasionally.
And I heard you make a comment on, I don't know if it was on MSNBC or one of the other interviews that you did, where you talked about just the symbolism of people seeing Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill. Can you talk a little bit about what that, so it's not like just civil disobedience of putting someone on the 20 that you think should be there, but what is your hope that this would convey to the American public just as they're buying things and going about their life to see Harriet on that bill?
Yeah, I just think that as a country, we have this currency that is wholly represented by old white men, the majority of whom were slaveholders. And it's time to change that pattern, because currency is everywhere, even as we move sort of more into this digital age. Everyone still carries and handles currency in their life. And that has a way of just sort of getting into your psychology, how you think of yourself and your place within society. And I think that's more important than a lot of people give it credit for. And so having a symbolic change of who we celebrate on our currency is something that's really necessary for this country to move forward with.
Well, I think that's very well put, and I appreciate everything that you're doing. I found there's a thing you can do. I made actually a little pendant today using your stamp.
Oh, nice.
Shrinky dinks. You can put anything on shrinky dinks. And I actually was looking to make a little pin, a lapel pin, but I couldn't. I just moved my studio, and it's everything's not where it's supposed to be right now. But anyway, the stamp could be stamped on other things. I mean, for people who buy it, if you have the stamp, obviously it's designed for 20s, but those crafty folks out there, you can stamp it in your journal, stamp it anywhere you want. I mean, I'm not suggesting people go around stamp just it's keep it on the 20,
Yeah, but it works well as a temporary tattoo as well.
Yeah, you can make
a lot of people stamp it on their arm. And
yeah, you can make a lot of things with it. Have stamping parties. Are people doing that? Having stamping parties where people come and stamp other 20s?
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen a lot of stamping parties happening.
Have you hosted any yourself?
No,
you're too busy making stamps.
Yeah, it's rare that I have an extra stamp lying around. I mostly ship everything I got.
Do you have anyone helping you with this, or do you do all of this? I mean, do you have family members or anybody that helps, friends that help you?
It's a one-man business for now.
Wow.
I'm just keeping it as simple as I can, and keeping in mind that we're living through sort of a unique moment in time in our country's history, and I don't want to create a job for someone that I am not sure will last in the long term. So I'm sort of keeping it financially and logistically as simple as possible.
Well, it sounds like you're hoping that there wouldn't be a need for someone to be in that role. You wanted to see it change.
Yeah, I mean, the ultimate goal is to not have to make these stamps. But where we are now, I think it's an important thing that people can do. It's sort of a small gesture, but I think it sort of opens the door towards other actions. I think it is not just raising awareness, but also someone who might initially be timid to take the act of stamping U.S. currency might feel more emboldened after seeing that, after doing that and seeing how powerful it is, and be willing to be more active in civil engagement and civil disobedience.
Yeah, no, civil disobedience can be very, very fun. As a journalist, I haven't really participated in much of that, except I was right on the 20, stamp in the 20s. So I was like, all right, yeah, I'm in for this one. So thank you so much. I don't know if there's anything that I didn't ask you that you want people to know about Tubman Stamp or anything else that you've got going.
The only other thing I can add is I made this project open source from the start. So the design files and all the details on how I make the stamp are available online. It's hosted on thingiverse.com. And so the idea was that it's not necessarily one person making a bunch of stamps, but anyone who wants to manufacture their own is able to do it. And so some other people have taken me up on this and started manufacturing their own stamps, selling them on Etsy as well. And all I ask is that people that follow through with this also follow in donating profits to charity, because I don't think this is a get rich quick scheme for anybody. I think the right thing to do is use this to amplify other causes that are going on at the same time. But I appreciate anyone who has taken it upon themselves to manufacture their own, however they want to do that, laser engraving or molding or otherwise. And I dream of this becoming a many-headed hydra that is so large that no government can kill it.
Well, you're on your way, and it sounds like you have help now that you've put that information out there for other people. So we'll see how many people take you up on it. The only thing I didn't ask you, which is usually something I do at the very beginning, is a little bit about your background. Did you go to art school and learn how to do these, how to create manufacture things on using 3D printing and all these other platforms that you're on?
No, I don't have any formal training, really. I just, I enjoy technology and digital fabrication. I think that's sort of where my skill set lies. And so I try to just focus on what I'm good at and contribute as best I can that way.
That's awesome. So you're completely self-taught.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. It makes the story even better. I appreciate you sharing that.
Sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I appreciate you agreeing to an interview at pretty short notice. I know we had talked a while back, and then I'm glad this was able to come together. And I'm going to look to try to get this posted today. So we'll kind of have that tie in with today's a good day to put it out there to celebrate Juneteenth and just inspire people to. Sometimes it's really simple little things that people can do to just make a difference. So thanks for keeping the conversation going. Yeah. And I'll let you get on with your day so you can get back to making stamps.
Got a lot to make.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.